Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Community Research Academy here at Weill Cornell Medicine Clinical Translational Science Center. Welcome. I welcome all of you. Get prepared. You're going to have an exciting, interesting time getting to know more about research. But before we go any further, what I want to do is I want each person just to give us a short, introduce yourself, and tell us your name and tell us one thing about yourself. For example, I'm a pastor as well as a nurse. I won't tell you for how long, but I truly enjoy working with the community and getting involved with the community and helping the community understand research more and understand their health as well. So let's just go around the room and each person just give a quick shout out and tell us one thing about yourself that you'd like for us to know.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bruce Rivera. I'm a pastor in the Bronx and also a clinical psychologist.
Welcome, Dr. Bruce. Okay.
Praise the Lord. Good afternoon. My name is Diana Foster, Brooklyn, and I'm grateful. The scripture says, to those much is given, much is required. And I'm so, so grateful to be here today.
Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Okay, who's going to be next?
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jacqueline Barrero. I'm very happy to be here. I am a community health worker, and I work for Einstein Medical College in the Bronx. Nice to meet everybody.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
Nice.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
I'm Danielle. I'm with Cornell University Cooperative Extension in New York City, and I'm particularly interested in extension work and how we can use extension to further the work in the community related to different issues like health and nutrition or agriculture. So I'm happy to be here and to learn and work with you all.
Nice seeing you again, Danielle.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. This is Sheila Davis from Brooklyn, New York. I'm a retired transit worker. I'm also the president of Church Women United in Brooklyn. And I just love working with the community, with my friends, my neighbors, and my church sisters and brothers. And I'm just here to learn as much as I can learn and pass on the information.
Thank you so much, President Davis, and welcome. Okay. Do we have anyone left? Dr. Ronnie Johnson. Are you on the line?
Put it in the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, put it in the chat. Okay. All right. Okay. Kimberly? All right. If you can, then you can give us a comment. If you can, if you're working and you can't and you're just listening, that is fine as well. So what I want you to know today is the mission of the Community Research Academy is to introduce community members to the translational research process, which is research that starts in the scientific labs and extends to the bedside of the sick. And in the past, when you thought of the bedsides of the sick, you thought of a place inside of a hospital, inside of an institution. But I want you to know now, when we're thinking of the sick and their bedsides, quite often we're thinking of the community. And that means community skills, community understanding, community intervention in the lives of the sick that's related to research or became about because of research. I want you to understand something. During this session today and going forward, I want you to ask yourself, what does this have to do with COVID? Because during COVID, there was a lot of conversation on research. and what researchers were and what they did and what they couldn't do. There were so many, many, many questions on research. And hopefully we'll be able to engage and discuss those questions or some of the information that we threw around during the COVID. So without further ado, what I'm going to do now is I just want you to take a quick look at the syllabus, the Community Research Academy syllabus. Yes, and Agnes is going to show her screen, and we're going to look at it because I'm just going to go over it with you because part of this is fun and just being able to discover research. So each and every one of you, when the program is over today, you will have access to this Community Research Academy syllabus. And basically what you're going to see, okay, continue to scroll up, is you're going to see the course objectives, what we're hoping that you will learn from this presentation. And you're also going to see what's going to happen in week 1, week 2, and so forth. And during each session, slow down. Okay. During each session, what you're going to have is you're going to have materials that we would like for you to review before class. And you can pick, I would say take a minimum of 3, whatever 3 you're interested in. Take a look at them. You don't have to look at them all. If you'd like to look at them all, you can, but you don't have to. So you have materials that we'd like for you to take a look at before class. And then we have materials that we'd like for you to take a look at after class. During each session, what you're going to have, usually we'll have 1 or 2 speakers, but we will always have time set aside so you can ask questions. And I think you need to ask the questions that no one wants to ask, that's on everyone's mind. I think that's crucial and that's very, very important. And after each and every session, you will receive a link to take a quiz on that material. And it's not hard. It's just basically things that were covered in the lectures or in the presentations. And we have some very, very exciting presenters who work in various departments here at the Clinical Translational Science Center, so that you'll get an idea of what goes on and how the elements of research are connected and how each element supports research and supports the information or supports the clinical trial getting to the next step and the next step and the next step, where eventually long-term goal is to get it to the bedside, which may mean getting it to the community so people can buy a prescription or buy an intervention or buy perhaps it may even be an app that we need in order to promote one's health. So there's various ways to promote health, and there's various forms of research, how research is used ultimately to improve one's health. So that's what we want you to consider, and we want you to think about and look at. Don't think about it as, oh, it's so hard. During COVID, everyone talked about research. And that is what I want you to know. So we're going to have conversations on research. At the end of the class, you'll get a certificate of completion. If you miss a class, you will have opportunities to take that class because all the classes will be recorded and put on YouTube, and you will get a link. We have some classes, some presenters that are not able to come this session, but we have pre-recorded the information on YouTube. And some of them, we're going to discuss those. We're going to take time to talk about them. Okay, so now what I want you to do today, what we're going to have is we're going to have 2 presenters. We're going to have the introduction to community research, the phases of clinical trial. And today we're going to have introduction to the Clinical Translational Science Center in and of itself will be done by Mr. Jeff Zhu, who is the Managing Director of the Community Engagement and Research Core here at the Clinical Translational Science Center. Jeff manages the Community Engagement and Research team, which provides support for community-based research studies and projects at all of the CTSC partner institutions. The community team is dedicated to increasing diversity in research, particularly by incorporating input from underserved, vulnerable, historically underrepresented, and minority communities, helping guide them into all the steps of the research process. So, but however, I realized I did not introduce everyone to the community, to our community engagement team. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let each one just introduce themselves very quickly to you today, so you'll know who is part of the team. So I'm going to start with Jessie He, who's sitting next to me.
Hi everyone, my name is Jessie. I'm one of the research assistants with Lula and Jeff. I'll pass it to Agnes. Let me come over there. Okay, Agnes is coming over. We're in the office. Scooting over.
Hi, I'm Agnes. If you've seen, I think I've seen some of you before, but hi everyone.
And then there's Bilal as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bilal. I'm also a research assistant on the team. Just a little bit about myself. I'm also aspiring to become a physician, and I'm really, really passionate about community health. So I think I'm going to enjoy this experience with you guys.
Yes, and then there's also Tanya, but she's out today. For the next call, she'll be on.
Okay, I thank all of you. Now you know the team. Now what I'm going to do with the next person that you will hear, he is in charge of the team. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Jeff Zhu, the Managing Director of the Community Engagement Corps. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Lula, for that wonderful introduction to both the program and for me. So today I'm going to talk with a little bit about what the CTSC is, what our mission is, but mostly I'm going to focus on the community engagement component and the work that we do there. So to get started, what is the CTSC? So the CTSC is part of a nationwide program that's funded by the National Institutes of Health. And really the story behind this is that when the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, and they're going to be, you'll find out throughout this course, there's going to be a lot of acronyms. That's just the way healthcare and research works. We will try our best to make sure that we explain what every acronym means. But in case you ever are confused, not sure about what an acronym is, feel free to raise your hand, interrupt, and just ask, hey, whoever the presenter is, please, could you explain whatever that acronym is? And so in this case, NIH is the National Institutes of Health. And when they did a research study in the 1990s, they found at the time that it took about 16, 17 years in order to take a new discovery that was made in the lab and to turn it into a new treatment, a new drug for the patient. And that's a pretty long time if you think about it, right? Imagine if it had taken us 16, 17 years to get the COVID vaccine. And I don't think anybody would have been very happy being in lockdown for that long. So really the goal of the clinical and translational science program is to fund centers to provide resources and infrastructure to speed up this research process. And so Weill Cornell's Clinical Translational Science Center was established in 2007, and we've been successfully renewed every 5 years since then, with the most recent award being about $62 million. And what we are, and our CTSC is not just Weill Cornell Medicine, but it also includes a partnership with New York Presbyterian Hospital, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, the Hospital for Special Surgery, Cornell University, Hunter College, and the Animal Medical Center. And our CTSC is one of 62 across the nation, and all of them are funded by the NIH with that purpose of speeding up the translational research process to make sure that discoveries that we find in the lab can be turned as quickly as possible into new treatments or new drugs. And we support both investigator-initiated and industry studies. So these are two sort of technical terms. Investigator-initiated means that it is something that a scientist or a researcher at an institution decides, hey, this is something I think is worth pursuing. and I would like to look into. Industry studies are those typically pharmaceutical companies or device manufacturing companies that, hey, we've developed a new device and we need somebody to partner with in order to test to see if our new device or our new drug works. And so what do I mean by translational research process? And what do I mean by translational research? And so to give a quick overview of it, when we think about research, I think a lot of people imagine, hey, a bunch of people in white coats in a lab working on petri dishes. And that definitely happens a lot, but that's what we consider to be basic science research. And that's this area on the left, area on the left where you see it's a T0. And that's really the stuff that happens before you do clinical and before you do animal studies. And the goal of that is to define mechanisms, targets, and sort of molecules. So very heavily scientific stuff, just trying to understand some basic mechanisms, how they work. And then after that, you get to phase 1, which is translation to humans. And this is when, okay, we found something in the lab. We think that it might have implications for healthcare. But first off, we need to prove that, hey, does this, this idea of ours even work? Is it even worth exploring further? And typically, this is when we first test new methods of diagnosis, treatment, or prevention in humans. And at this phase, we're not concerned about whether this thing works. We're just trying to determine, hey, is this thing even safe for humans? And then after that, we get to translation to patients. So this is phase 2 or phase 3 of the clinical trial process. And these are when we start looking, okay, so we identified in phase 1 of research that it's safe for people. Now let's see if this is actually effective and how it compares to other drugs. So phase 2 is looking at dosage. So how much of a particular drug, for example, do I need to give before it can actually have a therapeutic effect? And then phase 3 is this effective? Is the therapeutic effect of this drug actually effective? And then the third phase, the next type of translation 3, is translation to practice. And this is looking into a phase 4 clinical trials would be an example of this, and then clinical outcomes research. So really, we're looking at, is this new discovery or new treatment that we found, is it actually being delivered as recommended in a timely manner to the right patient to treat the right disease? So now we're taking a new treatment we've discovered and making sure that it's being administered to people or given out to people. And then in the final phase, we have translation to the community. And this is a lot of where we focus our efforts on. And this is, okay, after we've released this drug, it's safe, it's passed clinical trials, it's out, it's being given to patients. Is it actually having an effect on humankind, on the communities of America, or even the world? So at this point, we're looking at population levels. So the entire city, the entire state, the entire nation, or even the entire world. And is there a benefit to society of this particular research? And so, so that's the goal of the CTSC. And before I talk about the community engagement component, I want to just mention that the CTSC provides, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of resources to help investigators conduct their own research studies. So I won't go into too much detail about the resources we provide, but I did want to provide a quick overview of each of them so you have an idea of what this full scope of the CTSC actually is. So the first component is the CTSC Research Support Team, and that's headed by Pankaj. You can see, I like putting people's photos up on the slide so you can sort of put a face to the name. So Pankaj heads up this team, and you will be he will be speaking rather with all of you in a little bit today. And he heads up the research navigation team, which is a team of managers, coordinators, research assistants, and subject recruitment specialists that help our researchers conduct their studies. We also have a team of research nurses and technicians, and they support both an adult and pediatric studies, pediatric referring to children, and they carry out clinical assessments for a research protocol. And they do this in an inpatient and outpatient facility that the CTSC has and makes available to researchers we support. So inpatient is when an individual has to stay at the hospital for over a long period of time, typically at least overnight. And then outpatient just refers to a clinic where you're in there, you see your doctor, and you're out within the same day, typically within an hour or so. And then finally, we also, Pankaj works with the National Clinical and Translational Science, Clinical and Translational Trial Innovation Network, which is a national network comprised of many CTSA sites working together to help large studies that require multiple sites in order to test. So a classic example of this would have been the COVID-19 Moderna vaccine. The CTSC was our CTSC rather, was one of many, many sites that helped test that particular vaccine. And it went through a central location just to make it easier rather than having in order to speed to the process, rather than having Moderna approach every institution separately. The next component is the Nutrition and Metabolic Research Core, and it is headed by Dr. Katie Hoopman. You can see her photo there on the right. And they specialize in nutrition research design and methodology for clinical research. And what we have there is a specially equipped metabolic research kitchen that prepares and serves full-scale experimental diets, meals, and with full controlled or timed feedings. And they also do a bunch of other services related to metabolic and body composition analysis, nutrition assessment, as well as training for study personnel and nutrition research protocols. And all the components will provide consultations for help in designing research studies. And really, a lot of where the current work in the nutrition core is on the sort of ketogenic diets for the treatment of cancer. So ketogenic is a high-fat diet, very low carb or no carbohydrates. And it's currently a big fad in sorts of people for weight loss, as the weight loss fad. But in terms of what there's clinical and scientific rationale for efficacy is really in cancers. So in treatment of cancer. So there's a lot of focus and research in that area right now. The next component is the Clinical Translational and Education Program. And this is headed by Mylin. You see her photo on the right over there. And it comprises of a couple, so the KL2 and TL1 are just types of programs that types of grants that the NIH gives to train faculty members and postdoctorate students in the translational research process. So we have our own master's program, as well as advanced degree program, as well as these two types, KL2 and TL1, they're just two types of training awards through the NIH that we manage and offer. Next is the pilot funding component, and that's headed by Dr. Michael Bales. And for this one, the CTSC offers several categories of grants to pilot new ideas, new drugs, and new treatments. And there's several categories for all of these, but essentially on an annual basis. And typically we release these sort of November, December, we release the grant notice, and then the grants are typically due January, February of every year. And then next we have the Biostatistics, Epidemiology, and Research Design component, and that's headed by Dr. Paul Christos. And they help with study design, study sample size calculations. They provide advice on data analysis and data and research study design, as well as publication and presentation support. And so pretty much anything that requires sort of the math. Biostatistics is really the math of understanding research results. Paul Christos is the expert on that. And we provide, this is probably one of our most utilized research support services. Next is the CTSC Core Laboratory. And this is headed by Dr. Zhu, who you see his photo on the right. And this core specializes in providing lab resources for a lot of the research studies that we do. And they also have a 3D printing lab where they have 3D printers that can be used for research studies. And then finally, we have the informatics component. This is headed by Dr. Tom Campion and Liz Wood. You can see their photos on the right. And they are responsible for the IT, I guess, sort of infrastructure and resources that make research happen. A lot of what makes research happen is sort of like the back-end resources that enable everything to work. So if you think about it, how would we be doing this without Zoom? Or how would most of our lives function if we didn't have smartphones or email services? And those things are equally, they're similar tech analogs to research. And without these resources, a lot of the research that we do would not be possible. And so it's really thanks to these two and their work that a lot of this sort of back-end stuff that lets us collect the data and conduct research studies happen. And so with that sort of quick overview, I want to talk a little bit more about the community engagement and research component, which I head up. And so the community engagement and research component, that's what CERC stands for, works to improve the health of New York City residents by engaging community stakeholders in all aspects of the translational research process, disseminating best practices, fostering community-developed research projects, and increasing the inclusion of underrepresented populations in research. And so I know that's a mouthful, but really that emphasizes what we're trying to do. And all of it is basically summed up as saying, get more communities involved in research. And our approach to doing this is to build and sustain partnerships with the different communities of New York City, and then using these partners to disseminate health knowledge and services, respond to emerging health needs, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. You'll learn a little bit more about what we've been doing there, as well as the opioid crisis in America, opioid epidemic in America, and you'll learn a little bit more about our work there as well. And finally, to increase community engagement in the CTSC's research activities. And so what our model for making all this happen is really, it's really cyclical. So our approach starts out with developing partnerships with communities who provide services to these communities to help increase their knowledge, and then also increase our knowledge of the needs of these communities we work with. And this leads to the development of responses and innovations and new projects, and that further increases the engagement of these communities in research, and that leads back to building additional partnerships. So it's a very cyclical process that not only enables us to help the communities, but allows us as the academic medical center to learn from the communities that we work with. And that both sides of that, especially the second part, is very important and key, is key to making all of this work. And so the first part I'd like to talk about is community interactive video conferencing. And this is our health education program to underserved communities. And this started back in 2009. For those that remember that long, remember back then, it was actually about a year after the very first iPhone came out. So back then, the whole idea of video conferencing was very new. But at the time, we saw it as a means to get health education to underserved communities around New York City, where it's very difficult to get presenters to go in person. So it's really easy, for example, to get our faculty members to go to give a talk at the library that's 3 blocks away from campus, but it's an entirely different matter getting them to take a subway ride for an hour and a half to go out to the Far Rockaways to give a talk. So our solution then was to use video conferencing and connect them. So today, it seems pretty easy. We're using Zoom right now for this class. But at the time, it was a pretty new and innovative concept. And we've kept it up over the years, teaching a wide variety of health education topics. And over the years, we've had about 350 events now. And you can see the map over there with some of our community partners all across the city. The key takeaway I'd like to give is that the majority of the participants of this program have been minorities. So majority of participants are minorities. That's really is our goal. And you can see here that about 17% were non-Black Latino and about 54% were African-American or Black. And so definitely we've succeeded in reaching our target audience. The second program I'd like to talk about real quickly is the Heart to Heart Community Outreach Program. And this provides free health screenings to underserved communities across New York City. And I think several of you are quite familiar with that program, but I'll give a quick overview as well. And so the problem we are trying to solve with this program is to provide low-income and minority communities who disproportionately suffer from heart disease and diabetes access to healthcare. And the solution that we sort of went for this is to create a pop-up clinic at churches in underserved communities. And these pop-up events are staffed by students, medical students from Cornell University, as well as nursing students from Hunter School of Nursing, some PA students from Cornell, dietitian students from New York Presbyterian Hospital, and undergraduate students from Hunter College. And they provide, and altogether, these volunteers are overseen by faculty and physicians from these partner institutions, and they'll provide on-site blood tests and screenings for diabetes, heart disease, eye disease, and recently we've added nutrition counseling, as well as cancer screenings. And one of the things that we do a little bit differently is that one, we can actually get the blood results, the blood test results on site. We use point of care testing devices, so you get the results in about 10 minutes. And then we sit everybody down with a medical professional, typically one of our nurse practitioners rather, or one of our physicians, and they provide a consultation to explain the results and make lifestyle change recommendations. And if needed, we'll connect people to follow-up care and insurance enrollment. And over the years, we've had about 130 events. And again, the majority of our participants have been minorities. So we're looking at about 55% African-American or Black and 7% Latino. The Latino numbers are a bit underrepresented because for a lot of this period, we didn't have a consent that we could administer in Spanish. So the true number of people of Hispanic descent is probably higher, is significantly higher. We're just not quite sure how much because we could not enroll these people in the research study. We couldn't include them in the numbers. But even with that sort of like group not included in these numbers, we definitely have served a very needy community over the years. So about 20% of our participants live below the federal poverty line, and 58% do not earn a living wage. So living wage is defined as $53,342 for one adult with no children. Because we didn't have enough granular data for the early years to do a full living wage calculation, we just assumed that everybody that we screened was an adult with no children, which is obviously not the case. But even with that very conservative estimate, we can say at least 58% of the people we screened didn't earn a living wage. And then of also particularly note is that about 27% of the participants we screened are uninsured. And I think the sort of most surprising finding we had is that 52%, so more than half of our participants are pre-diabetic or diabetic. And so I think of the sort of like the biggest lessons that I've learned over the years is just the extent to which, these health disparities exist, even in New York City. It's pretty, difficult to hear that, for an average person in a lot of the communities we serve is diabetic or pre-diabetic. It's a very unfortunate circumstance. And then over the years, we've actually identified 701 new cases of prediabetes or diabetes and 473 new cases of high blood pressure. And then in terms of future plans for this program, real quick, we're going to add additional screenings in the future, hopefully some arthritis, hearing, and kidney disease screenings. And then we're also working with minority pre-medical students from Hunter College. Our medical students are going to be mentoring them in our program and get them involved in the more involved in the heart-to-heart screenings. And of course, we can use the heart-to-heart infrastructure for other health crises. So segue for that, example for that is the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've all experienced this. We've lived through the last few years, so I don't need to explain COVID. But one of the issues that resulted from COVID is that when the vaccines were first available in 2021, there were major disparities in access and major disparities in vaccine hesitancy. And so our solution to sort of address that is to work with the New York City and New York State Departments of Health, as well as the FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And then we brought in Hunter College, Hunter School of Nursing, Community Healthcare Network, which is a group of federally qualified health centers, as well as many, many, many other partners in order to launch vaccine pop-up sites in underserved communities throughout New York City. And so we did several things very differently for this project. One, we had these sites open on weeknights and weekends. And so one of the major issues we had early on in back then is that a lot of the vaccine sites were only open during sort of business hours. And for people who have families, who have children who need to work, that was not always possible to access those. And so to alleviate that, we opened weekends and weeknights. The second change we made is that all the administrative staff were hired from the churches and local community, as well as the vaccine ambassadors. So these sites were not staffed by sort of a bunch of people from the hospital that were moved there. They were staffed by people, as much as possible, by community leaders, people who knew others in the community and could relate to them. And then the other major issue that a lot of the community members had in this time is that the reservations for vaccine appointments were done only purely online, through a very complicated system the city had set up that didn't work very well. And as a result, people who didn't have hours to sit in front of a computer and try to fight for one of the limited vaccine slots were not able to get those. As a result, the vaccinations skewed heavily towards white and wealthier individuals. I remember one story from the Washington Heights site. One of the community members there I was talking to, he was an usher for the local church there that ended up working for the vaccine side. He told me that, his entire life, he'd never seen a Rolls Royce in his community. But as soon as the vaccine site near them opened up, he said every day he would see a parade of Rolls Royces parked in front of that building, chauffeuring people from, he's like, God knows where, to get vaccines in the middle of his community, while nobody else from his community could get a vaccine. So definitely, a huge issue. And in order to alleviate that, we negotiated with the New York City and New York State Department of Health that priority reservations will be given to the members of the local community. And the way we achieved it is that we let the church leadership actually make reservations and book reservations for 24 hours before it was opened up to the general public. So before it even appeared on the website, the church got first dibs to book people from the local community for vaccines there. And then the final problem that we had is that there was a huge shortage of healthcare providers and healthcare personnel in the area. So what we did, rather than take away nurses and doctors from the hospitals to give these vaccines, we certified over 300 Cornell and Hunter nursing and medical students to be emergency vaccinators. We provided them with vaccine hesitancy training, and they all signed up and set up system for them to volunteer at these sites. And really, this all happened really quickly. It was only 1 week between our first talks with Community Healthcare Network and the first pop-up event, and 5 weeks between the first event and we launched a permanent site through FEMA funding. And for anybody who's worked with the city, state, or federal governments, that getting something done in less than 5 years is a miracle. So the fact that we pulled it off in 5 weeks was pretty astounding. And so you can see, sir, on this slide, some of the sites we've had all across the city. There were 4 long-term sites that were funded through FEMA. One was in Harlem, was in Washington Heights, one in Jamaica, and one in East New York. And in addition to those, there were over 40 pop-up sites. And in terms of this project, we administered about 27,000 vaccines, 103 events that were staffed by our students, and most critically, 70% of residents who we vaccinated at these sites identified as African American, Black, or Hispanic. And so if you look at that compared to New York City as a whole, we're nearly double. So New York City as a whole was about 39% versus us about 70%. So definitely a massive difference in our ability at these sites to vaccinate the underserved. And then some photos from some various events across that period. And then finally, the last program I'd like to talk about a little bit is our opioid overdose prevention program. And the goal of this one is to stop opioid deaths. So this has been sort of the, I guess, less publicized, sort of less well-known crisis that's affected America in the last few years. It's been drug overdose deaths. And this started since the early 2000s, but really it's been peaking over the last 10 years. And actually since COVID, there has been an astronomical rise since March of 2020 in the number of deaths. So in March of 2020, when COVID started, it was only about 75,000 deaths a year. March of last year, it was up to 106,000 deaths from drug overdoses. And so this is a huge, huge issue. And really our solution to this problem has been to work with underserved communities in order to provide education on what is the opioid epidemic, and then training on how to recognize an overdose, administer naloxone, which is the antidote, and how to perform rescue breathing and hands-only CPR, and then distribute free naloxone kits. And really, this program was started because members of our community network, so several clergy members, actually came to us and told us that, hey, you know, Jeff, we've got a major problem in our communities. One of the clergy leaders told me that, hey, I had somebody die on the steps of my church last week. And then that's but the third one this year. And when we convened sort of a group of researchers from Cornell and some local government officials, sort of discussed the issue, the suggestions from a lot of them was, hey, we'll change some laws, maybe we'll do some new research into new treatments. But I think again, it was the community leaders, the clergy, who brought up, okay, it's great. How long are your proposals going to take? We're like, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years. And he's like, well, I need to stop the deaths today, not 5-6 years from now. And so it's really based on sort of that feedback that we completely changed up our initial plans. And we had shifted to this program of educating community members through the faith-based networks and to educate and distribute these naloxone kits. And so over the years, we've held about 350 events now. And again, the majority of people that we've trained and provided free kits to are minorities. So 59% being non-Black Latino and 21% being African American or Black. And then in terms of future plans, definitely we're trying to work with Hostos Community College in the South Bronx to certify some of their community healthcare worker students to volunteer at our events, and then to expand this program to additional communities beyond the South Bronx and East Harlem, and to the other boroughs as well. And so aside from that, the CTSC also does provide support to researchers to conduct community-based studies and research projects, but I won't go into that too much. And then finally, in terms of how do we get community members involved in research, we provide educational opportunities. So this Community Research Academy being one of them. And then we also educate the investigators about how do you do community research and what are the best practices to working with communities. And then we also provide community planning grants and community engagement pilot grants. So the planning grants are to form a partnership between a community and an investigator. And then pilot grants is the next step in that. Okay, now that you form a partnership, let's actually do a pilot study on some research topic. And then finally, the last thing I do want to talk a little bit about is our Community Advisory Board. So the CTSC's Community Advisory Board is a little bit different from our peers, in the sense that it's more of a community decision-making or review board than an advisory board, in the sense that we give them review and decision-making powers. The board itself is comprised of a large diverse group, so it's majority African-American and female. But there's wide representation throughout New York City from different boroughs and organization types. And in starting in 2017, we actually had the Community Advisory Board review our community planning grant applications. And then over the years, we've expanded it to all of our human subject pilot applications. And really what we do for this one is that we give the Community Advisory Board the same sort of responsibility as our scientific reviewers. So all the proposals are reviewed by both the scientific committee as well as the Community Advisory Board, and we weigh their scores equally in the funding decisions that we make. And then finally, we support a whole bunch of research studies throughout our partner institutions, and we'll go into the details. And with that, I'll be happy. Oh, Lula, did you want me to do questions now, or I guess since I do have to run in about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Do questions now. Go ahead.
Yeah, perfect.
Does anyone have any questions? That was very informative.
Yeah. Is Pankaj here yet?
Pankaj had a family emergency.
Oh no.
Yes, so he will not be attending. He will not be making his remarks today, but we will do a video. But what I will do right now is I just want to welcome Miss Kimberly. She said it's in the chat. I want to welcome Kimberly. She's studying public health and nursing. And I'm welcoming Raja Griffith. Raymond is a community health worker, senior clinical interviewer. And Miss Stephanie Reed, she is a social worker who is a community health care worker as well. So I want to welcome all of you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you. You have any questions for Jeff, please ask them now, because we have a little time crunch.
Yeah. No worries.
And what I want just to stress, Jeff brought it up, that when this session is finished, all of you will have an opportunity to become active. Did you hear the word? Active members of our community advisory board. That comes with a responsibility. And I know all of you have skills and understanding of what the community needs in terms of research. And you've got a lot to say about that. And we need your voice at the table. So I'm welcoming you right now because this is part of the preparation for that process.
Yeah, and so since we do have a minute, I do want to sort of explain that how that works a little bit more.
Okay,
Because
fine.
I think one common question is, hey, I'm a community member. How can I possibly contribute to the review of a scientific research proposal when I don't even understand the science? Now, I may not be qualified. And really, that's not necessarily a purpose. Obviously, we always welcome the community reviewers to examine the science as well, but that's really the science and whether or not this study is scientifically worthwhile. That is the sort of the purview or the role, rather the primary purpose of the scientific review committee. What the community advisory board's review is to focus on is the equity of it. So is this particular research study worth it devoting taxpayer money, taxpayer resources, the CTSC's resources, and the community time? Is this actually something that is meaningful to the communities of New York City, to your communities, or to those that would potential patients that would benefit from the study? And then also, not just that, but is the research plan equitable and fair? If you're looking at a research study, let's say you're studying a disease, let's say breast cancer, for example, does it include African-American females who disproportionately suffer from breast cancer? Does it include a fair plan to include under all people of all different socioeconomic status, not just wealthy individuals who typically tend to volunteer research studies, but are you making sure that you have representation from lower income or underserved communities? Or just same likewise, if possible, are you including rural communities as well as urban communities in that research study? And then is the research plan, how does the research team plan to recruit people to participate for the study? That is an area that very few researchers are particularly good at. And it's something that community organizations tend to be very good at. And so that is another opportunity for the community advisory board members to provide their input. So definitely when we design this process, we recognize there is indeed a huge need for community input in the review process because there's a lot more to whether or not a research study is worthwhile than just the sort of scientific validity of it.
Now, everyone, I'm sure you heard that. It's great information. And I want to know you have more information than you realize. And I want you to start thinking and utilizing and asking questions that may be somewhat controversial, but necessary, and they will support your involvement in clinical trials and your involvement at the community advisory board at the table. So I want you guys to get ready for the table. Thank you so much, Jeff. What Jesse's going to do is she's going to read some of the remarks that people sent in about the presentation. I think you.
Yeah, I have one from John Ruse, excellent presentation. Another one from Dr. Ronnie Johnson. Thank you for this wealth of information. I look forward to engaging and learning more about community research. And then another one from Eller. It's like, hi, Eller. Nice to meet you. She's the program director of Cypress Hills Adult Social Club. And that's about it.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks a lot, Jesse. All right, so
Well,
I'm gonna hop on off then, and I think you guys are gonna play a video from Pankaj.
yeah, we're going to play a video. Thanks again, Jeff.
You're
Much
welcome.
appreciated.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Everyone else, please stay on. We're gonna show a brief video about
We're going to have a. Go ahead.
for Pankaj.
Jeff has already.
What you can. Presentation. Now we will have Pankaj Kumar Patel to tell us a little bit more.
Thank you, Lula and Jeff. Hi, everyone. And Jeff has already given you a brief description of what clinical trials are, so I will just expand on that and I will talk more about clinical trials. So as you may have already learned that new tests and treatments aren't offered to the public as soon as they're made available. They have to go through clinical trials. And what are clinical trials? So clinical trials are carefully designed studies which test the benefit and risk of a specific medical treatment or an intervention, such as the new drug behavior or a behavior change. Once the researchers have completed a rigorous screening and preclinical testing, the company or the drug, the company that has made the drug will have to file for an investigational new drug application with the FDA. The FDA is the regulatory body that oversees all of drug and devices studies that are going on in this country. This application will allow investigational medicine to be tested in human volunteers and in clinical trials. So, what does a clinical trial test? So they test new drugs that are not approved by the FDA. They test the drugs that are already approved, but different uses of those drugs. They will test that. They will test new ways to give drugs, such as a pill form or an infusion form. So these are the various types of clinical trials that go through the regulatory process. So every clinical trial has to be led by a principal investigator. So the principal investigator is usually the doctor that is in charge of the clinical trial, along with a team of research staff. The FDA requires multiple phases of clinical trials. Jeff has already alluded to those phases. I will just give you a brief description on those phases in a little while. So they have to complete the phases of these phases before deciding if the investigational product is safe and effective for a broader patient population. Usually, the number of human volunteers in those clinical trials increases as the treatment moves through the different phases, which is why it takes almost a decade to get a drug approved. So like I said, clinical trials are carefully designed, reviewed, and completed. The principal investigator is the person that is in charge of the trial. They are the scientists that are the experts on what the clinical trial is about. They will take lead in designing the clinical trial, choosing the research team, and carrying out the study. So before a study or a clinical trial starts at an institution or at a site, they have to go through a regulatory review board called the Institutional Review Board. So the IRB, while Cornell has such an IRB where they review every single clinical trial that is conducted at the institution. The IRB consists of at least 5 members. These are 5 members from various backgrounds. They're scientific experts, non-scientific experts, and members that are not affiliated with the institution. And these are competent members who are able to review, evaluate, and evaluate the science and the medical aspects of the proposed clinical trial. So before a study starts, the IRB is responsible for reviewing the science and the ethics of the study. Once the IRB approves the study, then only then can the study be conducted. So the IRB will review documents such as the research protocol, the consent form, any advertising materials the study may have. So the IRB is responsible for reviewing all of these materials and then providing approval. And once the approval has happened, the investigator is responsible for compliance.
The investigator is ultimately responsible for ensuring that study is compliant with all IRB and good clinical practices requirements. If there are any deviations, they must report those deviations to the IRB. And once the study is conducted, once the study is in the process of, once the study is ongoing, basically, only then, and if there are any adverse events or any serious adverse events, they must be reported to the IRB immediately. Otherwise, that's considered a major deviation. And when the time comes for the drug approval, the FDA will look at all of the data to see if all of these adverse events were reported in a timely manner or not. So I will talk more about the terms, the common terms that are usually in clinical trials. So you may hear subjects. So subjects are basically the people who volunteer to take part in a study. They may also be referred to as participants or patients. You'll hear terms such as randomized clinical trial. So randomized means subjects are randomly assigned to different treatment groups. Open label, you'll also hear that. That means subjects, the patients, the participants, and the researchers are aware of the drug that's being given. You'll hear a term called blinded, a single blinded study or a double blinded study. So blinded study, a single blinded study is when the subject does not know which group they're being, which treatment group they're part of, and the subject don't know which group they are, don't know which group, which treatment group they're in until the end of the study. A placebo is a substance which does not contain the active ingredient of an experimental drug, but it looks exactly the same as the experimental drug. Then you'll hear study some information on. We work with other CTSAs in the country to conduct multi-center clinical trials. The phases of clinical trials. So before even the phase 1 starts, there's pre-clinical research and that's basically done in the lab to see, sometimes it is conducted on animals in the pre-clinical trials to see if the drug is safe. Then the phase 1 study is when it translates to humans. And the phase 1 studies are studies that are that aim to find the best dose for a new drug with the fewest side effects. So the drug will be tested in a small group of patients, about 15 to 30 patients. And the investigators start by giving very low doses of the drug to these patients. The drug may help patients, but that's not what they're really looking for. They're only looking to see if it's safe at that point. But then at phase 2, they open it up to a larger group of people, a couple of hundred or so, and that's when they test the safety and the efficacy of the drug as well. Phase 3 is when the study goes over 100 or maybe in the few thousand. So that's when they compare the drug to the current standard of care drug. So, for example, in an oncology study, there may be already an approved drug, but another company might want to create a compound with a different component of to treat the same type of cancer. So that company will test their investigational drug with the already approved drug to see if their investigational product is safe and efficacy as well. So often these trials are randomized. That means the patients are put into a treatment group called with different trial arms, and they're put into these groups by chance. Basically, that's what it means when they say it's randomized. So the patient may either be randomized to the current standard of care treatment, or to the new treatment, the experimental group as well. So there can be more than 2 treatment groups in phase 3 trials. The control group, like I mentioned, is the standard of care treatment. The other group gets the new treatment, which is being studied. So so if it's double-blinded, neither the doctor nor the subject will know which group they're in. So this will produce results, better results at the end of the study. So that the ultimate goal of the clinical trial is to get that investigational drug approved. And once they see that the investigational drug works as good as the comparative drug, then that's when they know the results are good and they're ready to apply for FDA approval at that time. Usually phase 3 is needed right before FDA approval. And phase 4 is when the FDA could have already approved the drug, and then a study can go on to phase 4, which is done at larger, at a community level. The drug is tested in several hundreds of thousands of patients, and this allows for better research. And they look at long-term data in phase 4 to see if there are any side effects long-term, meaning phase 4 can be as long as 10 years. So. And there are important questions for one to ask when they're joining a clinical trial. And the clinical trials are they're an important treatment option for people with rare diseases or people with cancer. So there may not be treatment available for all those types of disorders. So your doctor or they may provide a clinical trial as the last option. And sometimes they may be the right option for that person. So before a clinical trial, before you join a clinical trial, there are some important questions that one should be asking. So they should be asking, the first question they should ask is there a clinical trial that I can join if there are no other treatment options available, or if that's the last thing you need to resort to? What is the purpose of that clinical trial? What kind of tests and treatment does that study involve? Does the treatment have any, what are the risks and the benefits? Has the treatment been used before, or has it been used in other types of cancers? Will I know which treatment will I receive? If it's a blinded study, will I receive the treatment, or what are my chances of receiving the treatment? So these are some of the important questions that one may ask their doctor or the research study team when they're partaking in the research. So one of the biggest aspects of the clinical trial is the inclusion and exclusion criteria. So the inclusion criteria is everything that a study must have or the patient must have in order to be included in the study. And exclusion criteria are factors that would make the patient ineligible to included in the study. So these are some of the important aspects that are part of being in a clinical trial. And these are some of the questions that are important to ask your doctor or an investigator before joining a clinical trial. And these are questions that you'll ask during the informed consent process. So before you join a clinical trial, you will have to review the informed consent form. It's a few pages long, and that informed consent form will describe the study in detail. It will include the risks and benefits. You'll be able to fully read it, and you will have all your questions answered. Investigators encourage that you take your time to read the consent form, read it with your family members, read it with your friends, and ask any and all questions that you may have. And once you do decide to partake in the study, you must sign the informed consent form. And if you're ineligible to sign, if it's a study done, if it's a study done in children, then the parents must sign the consent form, and the children must sign the absence form. So these are basically the basics of partaking in a clinical trial. The research team, while the trial is going on, they may learn of new benefits and risks during the study. And if you feel that you're at risk, the patient can at any time you don't need to give a reason, may leave a clinical trial. So if you feel uncomfortable, if the patient feels uncomfortable in a clinical trial, they may leave the study at any time without any questions being asked by the research team. You can leave the study for any time for any reason. So basically, staying in the study is your choice. So an example of a clinical trial that we have ongoing right now, as you may have heard in the news, is the COVID vaccine trial. So at Cornell, we are a part of a study right now that's enrolling nationwide. It's enrolling up to 30,000 patients. It's a phase 3 randomized, observer blinded placebo-controlled study. So like I said, it's a phase 3. So the patients are randomized either to a placebo or the actual vaccine. So it's a vaccine study. The patients may either be randomized to a placebo or they may actually get the vaccine. And the phase 3 study is there to evaluate the efficacy, the safety, and the immunogenicity of the vaccine. And it's being conducted in patients from 18 to 65, patients that are 18 years old up to 65 years old, with no known history of COVID infection. So what are some of the challenges that are faced in clinical trials? So clinical trials, there was a recent article published in Stat News. So clinical trials have been plagued for years by biggest problems in clinical trials are they don't recruit enough people and they fail to reflect the diversity of our nation. So researchers whose job is to field clinical trials with participants have begun teaming up with tech companies, with communities to find modern solutions that are ongoing in clinical trials. So the first fact is that 25% of all cancer trials, they fail to enroll many participants as are needed. And 18% of those trials are closed without fewer than half of the target number that are required for recruitment. And 86% they don't meet those recruitment targets. And these failures have significant scientific and financial costs as well. Financial costs for the sponsor, scientific costs for the research team that's conducting the study. So failing to recruit enough participants can jeopardize the results of a trial. So before a study is designed, they go through a study design. And they determine the exact number of patients needed to produce significant scientific data. So if you don't produce that significant scientific data, your study will not be approved. And these are the costs that happen if the study does not meet the recruitment expectations. So they can fail even if they manage to recruit a number of participants, because the participants may not be diverse enough to produce the knowledge. So what are some of the what are these disparities? Why are these disparities? So they're not confined to race alone. Most clinical trials lack participation from ethnic, gender, and sexual minorities as well as elderly, people who live in rural areas, and individuals of varying socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's very important for us to team with the community to educate everybody about what clinical trials are, and for the community to make an informed decision of participating in clinical trials. So the focus has to be on engagement and the science of building relationships with and partnerships with the community members. So that's it for my end. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take questions.
And have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. John Royce here. A
Okay.
quick question. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Wanted to find out, how do you obtain your participant, how difficult it is in terms of convincing our special population to engage in clinical trials.
Okay, now I have a question. When you're saying special populations, are you referring to a group of people who have a certain kind of cancer? Or are you talking to the community members at large?
Well, community members at large, underserved and
Okay.
primarily.
Now, that traditionally has been a problem, getting community members involved in research. That's why it's so important to get people from the community who understand research, who can talk about research within their communities, because it's extremely difficult. That's why you are needed at the table, the Community Advisory Board table, to review grants, pilot, so that you can look at the information and you can see when someone says the word community, what does it mean, community? Okay. Sometimes when you use the word community, you are referring to a group of people that may do the same thing. So you may be referring to a professional group. Nurses, they're a community. Social workers are a community. Are you referring to where they live? Or so if you're saying I'm referring to a community, Upper East Side, Lower West Side, or Central Harlem, the center of the city, that's another community. Or are you referring to a community in terms of demographics? So maybe are you referring to an ethnic group, age group? So that's why when you say community, now, it is extremely difficult to get certain groups, ethnic groups, involved in research. For example, if you just think about what went on during COVID and look at the problem that occurred when there was a need to get community members involved in research. In the beginning, African Americans, Caribbean Americans, they were not getting involved in research. It took a lot. So what happened is media got involved, and we saw commercials on television that supported ethnic members getting involved in research. And that was the impetus that drew them into research. So certain groups are easily involved. They enjoy getting involved in research. For example, Weill Cornell Medicine is located 68th in York, and that is like the East Side. And you'll find that a lot of the people that participate in clinical trials are Caucasian women around the 50s or a little older. But you have to also understand, when we're looking at the research is going on around where they live. It's going on within their community. So that may be something that draws them into that particular activity, getting involved in research. So when you start to look at the various communities around the city, and you look at the location of where of what's going on in their communities, is there clinical trials going on in various communities? And the answer is yes. There are many communities that have a lot of research. For example, you will be watching a tape because the presenter is so busy that she may not have time. If she has time, she'll do it in person. But if not, we will let you watch her tape. Up in the Bronx, what is going on around Lincoln and Einstein is that community members got together. There was a group of people, and what they did was they learned about research, because what was going on was a lot of people, a lot of ethnic groups were saying, we are tired of people who are doing clinical trials, rushing into our communities, doing their clinical trials and rushing out. We are tired of people coming and asking us all sorts of questions. And then we give them answers, but they don't publish our answers. Their answers don't reflect the fact of what we told them. It has nothing to do with our opinions, and we want our opinions to be known. And that's part of this entire process. So back to your question, very difficult to
Yeah, you know, and it also raises, thank you for your comments in terms of being specific when it comes to community. I'm a student today.
Mhm.
Pardon me, but the other thought comes to mind is when these drugs become successful in treating X disease, does the manufacturer of those specific drugs gain capital behind that? And if they do they share those capitals funds with the participants that were in those trials?
Now, I think, let me hear your opinion, because I think you really already have an answer.
You want to know my opinion?
Yes.
Well, based on a John Hopkins study, I forget the lady's name, and forgive me for that, it was an African-American lady that they performed a certain test. I forgot the test that they performed. And the family or her never received a dime behind that specific treatment drug. I forget her name. At my age, I forget things at this point. But just based on history, when I say our people, I'm talking about my ethnic background: Puerto Rican, Hispanic, African American. We don't benefit from the capital or the wealth that they receive.
Now, what I'm going to ask you to do, okay? And so when we come back to the next session, we'll talk about it a little more. What I want you to do is I want you to look at what's going on in the papers, look at what's going on in the news regarding Big Pharma, regarding the, right now, the president put in a list of drugs and medications that he is willing to take Medicare to negotiate the price of these meds and look at the results. And I think that helps give your question, it'll help clarify the question, because I want to know, is it benefiting, or are the pharmaceutical companies delighted because they want to share this? They want to make the drugs more affordable.
Well, I looked at it already. There's about 3 drugs, I believe, that they just are going to start off negotiating.
Okay.
And then if you look at the 340B program, I think you're familiar with that, where, it benefits our community. And that's the manufacturers really don't want to give that benefit any longer. So, but I'll look at it and respond because of sake of time. I'll look at it.
Yes. Oh my. We are over time.
Yeah.
So
interesting. You guys are great.
Good. Well, you know what? I'm so sorry that we went over time.
No, it's fine with me. It's fine with me.
I know, maybe you, but we have to try to stick to our time limits.
Well, no, I understand.
We'll continue this conversation. I think it's a powerful conversation, but I think also it will make you more aware and I'm just going to ask everyone up here, how many times have you been approached about getting involved in a clinical trial? And if you were, how did you feel about it? Were you eager or were you reluctant, and why? So you know what? We won't answer that question today. We will talk about it next session. Now, all of you will be getting a quiz, and it's not a quiz to find out how much you know. It's a quiz that we want to encourage you to think about the process so that you'll be able to share it. This is Reverend Dr. Lula May Phillips. If no one else has a question, I thank you all for attending. Looking forward, if I haven't met you in person, looking forward to meeting all of you. Most of you I do know. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Be blessed. Bye-bye.